Dennis McKenna, welcome to Evolving Earth.
Thank you. It's a
It's so
pleasure
great
to be here.
It's so great to have you here. You're one of my heroes, and I always feel so blessed when I get to invite one of my heroes on the show, and they say yes, and then we get to have a conversation and get your message out, like help get your message out. So thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
So I want to start with the elephant in the room, which
Okay.
is the global pandemic that is currently evolving. Um,
Right.
I've heard you talk about the Earth as Gaia, the Earth as having intelligence, as plants, and the whole biosphere as having its own intelligence. So I was excited to ask you what your perspective is on this pandemic and how you think about it.
Well, we could easily go more than an hour on just this topic, but I think, yeah, the elephant in the room is a good way to put it. And I think that we've been anticipating something like this for a long time. I mean, I think there's a general sense in everybody's sphere in a certain way that the current situation on the planet is unsustainable, and this, in the context of Gaia, I think this, this is a message from Gaia, but it's a fairly gentle message compared to what it could be. I mean, this pandemic, as bad as it is, as a virus, it's not particularly virulent. It's virulent, it's contagious, but most people recover, and most people don't have a severe illness from it. Unfortunately, certain demographic groups like me, old people like me, for instance, we're at greater risk. But I do think this is a message from Gaia, and the socioeconomic, the political, geopolitical effects are more of a wake-up call than the disease itself. I mean, I think the disease itself is not particularly serious, but it's basically brought civilization to its knees, in a very short time. And I think this is a message that reminds us who's running the show.
Yeah.
And we're not running the show. That's the thing. Nature is running the show. And I think that this is a gentle reminder to us that we need to wake up, and we need to change a lot of things if we're going to live sustainably on this earth with each other, with the community of sentient species, and all of those things. And it's a gentle reminder in the sense that, compared to other things that might have been such a reminder, such as a much more virulent virus. I mean, we're just damn lucky that this thing is not as pathogenic as it could be. The next one might not be so kind, and it could be much more devastating. What if this thing were some kind of like an airborne transmitted Ebola type virus? Can you imagine where we would be at if it was something like that? I mean, we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to bear in mind that, we think our human-made systems are so invincible and so powerful, and yet a little thing like this can just bring the whole thing down. So it's not a stable system. It's not at all stable or sustainable. And we've known this for a long time. And I like everyone else, I follow the Twitter feeds and the text messages and so on that come through. And the sentiment I'm hearing among many of our members of the psychedelic community is that this is a chance for us to take a step back, take a deep breath, and look at our existential situation, which we need to do. It could have been much more. I mean, this doesn't involve the destruction of any infrastructure.
Hmm.
You know, something like a nuclear war or a asteroid impact or something like these things, they physically devastate, you know, the planet, the environment. But viruses, they're very selective. They're like Gaia's surgical strike, you know, and I think that it's Gaia's way of reminding us again that we're not the one in charge, and how, you know, and if we don't straighten out, you know, Gaia will protect itself, I think. And whatever we mean by Gaia, and what I mean by it is this homeostatic kind of planetary organism, really. The whole Earth is an organism, and organisms tend to equilibrium and homeostasis. And anything that disturbs that, you know, they have, organisms can defend against it, you know. So in a sense, we are like, you know, our species is like is like a pathogen, you know, in the body of the biosphere. Maybe a cancer is a better
Right.
way to
Just
describe it,
keeps
you know.
dividing. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not from outside that system. We're part of that system, but we're a part of the system that's gone just really nuts, you know, and we're way out of balance with the rest of nature, and that's our problem. That's what we have to do. And this is just a reminder that no, you monkeys are not getting your act together, and it's a reminder that we have to do that, you know, and because it, the next pandemic could be much worse, or whatever it is, you know. I mean, just because we have a pandemic, I mean, there's a whole list of things that might come down the pike to just be the icing on the cake, you know. As we know, these mega super storms, these, you know, and eventually global catastrophes like asteroid impacts and that sort of thing. So, you know, it Earth is a dangerous planet, and we sometimes forget that. And you know, I anyway, that's that's what I think about it.
Yeah. Dennis, can you tilt your camera down a little bit?
Oh,
Right.
sure. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
Um, so for those of us watching this and realizing that before something new is born, something old has to die, and when something old dies, it's experienced as a crisis.
You know,
And so what can, you know, what can we do as a human family now, do you think, to shepherd us through this crisis and have it be something that changes our course as a culture?
well, you know, I think we have to internalize that message, you know, that the planet is giving us, that we are in an unsustainable situation, and it's because we're out of sync, we're out of harmony with nature. And you know what we're looking at, I think, is the consequences of 2,000 years plus, at least in the West, of this attitude that we own nature. You know, we're there, it's there to serve us, it's there for us to exploit. And that's been the way the Western mindset has been for a long time. And I think in part, to a great extent, this is this attitude is reinforced by the so-called Abrahamic religions, Christianity particularly, which teaches that we should not value nature, that it that we should dominate nature. That's the human destiny, and that it's here to serve us, and that we need not value it because there's the afterlife. You know, your reward will come in heaven,
Yeah.
right? So you don't need to value your time here and now on Earth. I'm sorry, this is a shell game. You know, it's a con game. Maybe it will and maybe it won't come in heaven, but we have no idea about that.
Yeah.
Actually, we have an idea. We all have our various ideas, but I think what's in front of us now is we've got to focus on the present moment, the situation our species is in, and what we can do to mitigate this unsustainable, rapacious consumerism that leads to the depletion of the Earth's resources and the further toxification of the Earth. And this coronavirus is a great lesson because it forces us to just stop, just slow down, not just slow down, but stop for a while.
Yeah.
And everyone is appalled by that, but maybe that's what we need to do, is stop and think, because I think this is a pivotal time. We can, as society does come back together, we can, we can use this as a valuable lesson and make some changes, or we can ignore it, or I mean, you can't exactly ignore it, but eventually we'll get through this. And as a species, we forget things quickly. I mean, everyone thought that the Spanish flu, the global influenza epidemic in 1918, was going to completely change everything. And it did for a while, but then we forget, we get these lessons, but then they don't stick.
Yeah. It's like
Maybe
the
this one will stick.
it's like the psychedelic experience. You get the message, but then the integration, actually bringing it into your life and making the changes, is the hardest part.
That is absolutely the hardest part. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. And so trying to come to terms with a psychedelic experience or a psychedelic life, we know what we have to do. If you're familiar with psychedelics and take them for learning, spiritual development, personal development, or whatever, everyone knows that the hardest part is after the session, after you go home from the retreat or whatever it might be. Then the real work begins.
Yeah.
And and the same is true. What I am concerned about, many things concern me, but what I'm concerned about is that, you know, it, well, just the fact that we will not make the changes that everyone knows we need to make. That's the thing, and there's a certain consistency. There's a certain group of people. I'm trying to see about turning these off. Yeah, okay. Uh, it's very hard to have a reasonable dialogue, I think, in this world now these days, because a while back, maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we kind of haven't had an agreement. We had a consensus about what was reality, and now that's been
Right.
changed. There are
Right.
multiple realities. There is no truth. We live in this post-truth environment. And, what we used to rely on, science and collaborative dialogue and all of those things are not respected so much anymore. And I think this is to our peril, that we have developed this talent, or certain people in political fractions have developed this talent for denying reality. They invent alternate truth.
Yeah. I remember I saw recently a TED talk on willful blindness, and
Willful blindness,
this
yes.
town that was full of asbestos. All the buildings had asbestos, and then there's tons of sickness because of it. And somebody tried to blow the whistle, essentially saying we need to all move out of these houses or knock them down or renovate them, and the whole town ignored her. and
Yeah.
and the talk was about willful blindness as a phenomenon for us as humans. To, I guess, denial is a mechanism to deal with things that are too painful for us to consciously deal with. And it seems like the whole climate change denial thing seems like it's a defense mechanism against what is actually going on the earth. That it's being sold to people, I guess.
Right, but it's not a real defense, right?
Right.
Denial is crawling under a rock and hoping that it's not happening. You know,
Right, and it's still happening.
That's not a constructive response,
Yeah.
because it solves nothing. And it's like we shirk the need and indeed the duty, the necessity of waking up, because we're so factionalized in this culture, we're so tribalized, and you actually have, there really, there are all sorts of alternative realities, alternative facts, but the hard truth is there's only one, and facts are facts, and the alternative facts are lies, or delusions, but the point is they're not true. And so people that cling to that, are doing so at their peril, and they're not doing it in a way that moves the conversation toward any kind of resolution. This coronavirus, depending on how long it lasts, and how long it takes for society to come back to some semblance of normal, this could be an opportunity to put different policies in place, policy changes that might make a difference, like policies on pollution and carbon use and getting away from fossil fuel and all the things that we know have to be done, but are so easy to put aside, especially because you have these enormous financial interests who like it just fine the way it is.
Yeah.
And any radical change, is a threat to their hegemony and their dominance. But, we have to make this transition. We have to make this change, I think. So the question is, how do we do that? Well, one way is psychedelics. Psychedelics, I often say, is a catalyst for global consciousness change. If you get the right people together with the right medicines, it can make a big difference. And you need to, because as you know, psychedelic experiences, people often come away with a sort of renewed appreciation of their relationship with nature.
Yeah.
And the importance of having a harmonious relationship with nature and a lesson learned that our current relationship is way out of whack, and this is the problem. We have not figured out how to live within the boundaries that nature wants to set upon us. So this is the lesson we have to learn. And it threatens capitalism. It sort of threatens that capitalistic mindset. But capitalism is not not a viable system. There are aspects of it that are good, but when you've got 7 billion people, all of them aspiring to a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, how is that going to happen?
Yeah, we just don't have the land for it.
Yeah, we don't have the land, we don't have the resources. So it's a dismaying situation in some ways.
Do you think 7.5, this is a touchy subject, but 7.5 billion people, do you think, how many humans can the earth support, do you think?
We have no idea. It is supporting 7.5 billion in various ranges of comfort, ranging from, ultra wealthy people that live in unimaginable luxury, and people at the other end who live in unimaginable squalor. But it's sustainable. The question is not how many can it support. It can probably support twice that many. But the question is, what is the quality of life?
Yeah.
You know, and how sustainable is that? If we could wake up now, you know, we can maybe take steps to slow down this consumerist frenzy, you know, and that's very hard for people to do, you know,
Yeah.
and you know, I mean, you and I can't do it, or you know, we like our comfort, we like our computers, our access to internet, our, you know, we can all of that, and I'm not sure it works for everyone to just take a vow of poverty, you know, but you know, and start living a less consumer lifestyle. But what's happening in the on the global scale right now is that this virus is forcing us to step away from, you know, this frenzied commerce that we carry on, you
Yeah,
know.
it is pretty cool in that respect that it's making everybody press pause on for some people a small segment of their life, for others their entire livelihood, and showing, I guess, making me at least reevaluate, you know, do I need to do the things that I've been doing? Do I need to drive so much? I haven't driven my car in 2 weeks. It's sitting in the driveway.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think that's good. I think that it gives us a chance to kind of try on this less consumer related, consumeristic lifestyle, you know,
Yeah.
drive less, consume less, spend more time with your friends and less time, you know, looking at screens, even though we're looking at screens. And, you know, we're finding some pretty creative ways to use virtuality now, since we can't have conferences and can't travel and all that.
Yeah.
So maybe this is one of the lessons that we can learn is, you know, the intelligent deployment of these kinds of communication technologies gives us a way to connect without burning carbon, without going different places. But then, you know, that also impacts people, you know, in the tourist industry, travel industry, and all that that depend on people doing these things. So, you know, we're definitely at a juncture. I wish I knew what it looked like beyond this.
Yeah.
You know, what will we be thinking and talking about a year from now?
Yeah. Who knows, right? It's a big question.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, I think eventually we will get through this, you know, because pandemics don't last forever. We will get through it. I'm afraid because, you know, stupid policy decisions are being made. Many more people will die than should die, that need to die, you know, so that's unfortunate, you know, because it's not necessary. Uh, so, you know, a year from now, will we have the wisdom to make the changes so that a year from now we're actually living in a really a culture that has taken its medicine, in a sense, internalized these understandings and made some changes, you know? Or will we just get through it and then forget, as we tend to do, and then just go back to
Back
the
to the
way
party.
back
Yeah.
to the party until the next one comes down,
Yeah.
you know? And as you know, the older I get, the less confidence I have in the ability of our species to adapt and to wise up, you know. And maybe that's just me. Maybe I get old, I'm becoming a curmudgeon, you know. But I used to be more optimistic about it.
Yeah, me too. You know, somebody who said to me, half of the population is below average intelligence.
By definition, right? Yes, of course. The other
So
side
yeah,
of that is half of it is above
yeah,
average
right, true.
intelligence.
Yeah, glass is half empty, glass is half
Yeah,
full.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
So on a
what is intelligence? I mean, this is a, you know, a question that we need to think about, you
well, how
know.
intelligent are we if we're destroying our home and the place that provides all our food and the air we breathe and the water we depend on.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it's
this
crazy.
does not, this is a demonstration of idiocy, not intelligence, you know. And you look at nature, and there's a lot of talk now, that idea that nature is intelligent, that plants, fungi, and all of these things are intelligent. And I really believe they are intelligent, but they're not intelligent like we are. They have a, they don't have brains, right? And it turns
Yeah.
out they don't have nervous system. Turns out that's not so important to be intelligent. I mean, what seems to be a sort of a requirement for intelligence is complexity, highly connected networks. But it doesn't have to be a neural network. I mean, we use the term neural network, and it's a misnomer because it implies a nervous system. And I think neural network came out of cybernetics and that sort of thing. But a better term, I think, is hyperconnected networks. And if you look at that, they are everywhere in nature.
Yeah.
Mycelial matrices, root systems in old growth forests. Everywhere you look, you find networks. And networks imply signal transduction processes and equilibrium and homeostasis. And that's a lot of what networks do. Is they exchange information among different elements of the internal network and with the outside world to essentially optimize their survival, optimize their ability to adapt to a particular situation, whether it's the size of a planet or the size of a pond or somewhere in between. And that's intelligence. That if it, if you look at a situation, and you have to marvel, how intelligent plants are, for example, or fungi are, in terms of just being able to optimize their existence on this planet.
Yeah.
Why can't we do that? I mean, that I think that's what we've got to learn.
Why can't we do that?
Because I don't know. Because we don't listen very well, and we're in denial. I mean, we prefer alternative facts, alternative truth to facts and truth. And then and you can play that game for a while, but then along comes something like this, and slaps you in the face and say, guess what? You monkeys, you've been ignoring this, and now here we are. You, the species, you don't have the option to ignore it anymore. We'll make sure you don't ignore it. Because we're just going to bring everything to a grinding halt for a while.
Yeah, I guess my one of my answers to that question is that we're running bad software, and when I try and trace that back, it seems like during the quote unquote Enlightenment, when we got disconnected from nature and religion came in, and this year I've learned that religion or spirituality used to be delivered through direct experience. Like, we've been taking psychedelics for thousands of years. And then we got separated from that, and all of a sudden spirituality was what some guy said, or was what was written in the book. And we're supposed to ignore nature and listen to what's written in the book. So we've all been running this bad software where the ego, our identity, is disconnected from each other and from the earth. And that's been my experience of the last year, of getting into intentional use of psychedelics, which I had been doing psychedelics for 20 years, but I never closed my eyes.
Oh my God.
I know. I missed out.
Okay. Well, it's not too late, right? I mean, you're young, so you can do that.
Yeah. So the last 18 months I've started closing my eyes and doing it in an intentional setting. And that has helped me to understand how spirituality and the direct experience of something bigger than myself and psychedelics go together.
Right. Right, and I think that's a key difference in a way between, I make a distinction between spirituality and religion. Uh, I mean, spirituality is a more related to a direct experience of the divine or the transcendent or whatever you want to, however you want to characterize it. Religion is terrified of spirituality.
Right.
The last thing organized religion, wants you to have is a spontaneous mystical experience. It's very threatening to the order and to the, their agenda is to tell you what to think, essentially, or fill your head with a lot of sort of pre-cooked truths that you're just supposed to accept. You must have faith, right? That's always said. You have to have faith, and make sure that you don't have a spontaneous religious experience,
Or spiritual experience, you
or
mean? Yeah.
spiritual, mystical is
Mystical.
is a
Yeah.
good term. That's not what they want, because it's in their interest to make sure that you stop thinking. You turn off your mind, you stop asking all these pesky questions, and just accept the tenets of the faith. We have all the answers here. See, it's written down in this book right here. You just read that book, my son, and you're going to be okay.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, most of the book is horseshit. You can find anything in that book, and it's an invitation to stop thinking.
Yeah.
And psychedelics are an invitation to start thinking. And I think that's the big difference. Terrence often was fond of saying that the psychedelics were not dangerous in themselves. They're not toxic substances or anything like that. They're dangerous because they make you have dangerous ideas.
Ideas that challenge the status quo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's what they do very well. They take you out of this reference frame. They let you look at it from a distance, maybe not very far outside, but you're outside the reference frame looking at it, and the message is, maybe reality is not like it appears. Maybe it's not like we'd like to think it is, and so the psychedelics can instill doubt, uh, with respect to what you thought what you think it can instill doubt, right? And we think of doubt as a bad thing, but it's not really, because it's an invitation to learn,
Yeah.
and it's an invitation to look more deeply into something, a phenomenon, or whatever you're studying. Doubt is a very useful thing. Doubt and curiosity.
Hmm.
Doubt. You can apply the term skepticism also as a form of doubt. It's like it's an invitation not to buy into whatever is being touted to you or us as given truth. It's an invitation to say, well, I question that, and this is the essence of science too. Science is a very powerful method for asking questions of nature and getting answers back that you can more or less, you can test them, you can verify them, always within limits, right? And the beauty of science is it constructs hypotheses or ideas. What would you say? Suppositions, I guess you could say, about the way certain things are. But then you can actually test those hypotheses, and that's the task of the scientist, is to build a model of reality or a model of some phenomenon that you're studying in your head, a hypothetical framework that explains your operations, your observations. And then you try like hell to demolish the model. If you're being honest, That's the task of science. You
Mm.
construct a hypothesis and you try to knock it down, because no hypothesis is ever going to explain everything, but good ones will explain a great deal of a phenomenon that you're studying. But you never reach a point where you say, we know everything there is to know about this particular phenomenon, whatever it might be. We can, we can take that to the bank, and we have this nailed down. It never works like that. You can only disprove hypotheses. You can never prove them. All you can do is you can improve them. You can look at the model, say, well, that didn't explain this, that didn't explain that aspect. We have to revise the hypothesis. We have to change it. Or maybe we just have to chuck it completely and start from the ground up. Both of these things are very healthy things to do if if your task is to understand the world, and understand our place in it. So science is, a very powerful tool, I think, for applying analytical thought in a very systematic way to understanding the world and our place in it and everything in it. That said, you also have to be cognizant of the limitations of science. I mean, science is not the perfect tool. It's a very useful tool, but it too has limitations,
Right.
as we all know.
Not everything can be conducted in you can't have a control for every experiment, right?
Not everything can be understood in a reductionist way, or a
Right.
quantitative way. I think this is the mistake that science has made since the Enlightenment, that it all must be quantifiable and reductionist. I mean, this is the Cartesian dualism, right? The Cartesian separation of conscious experience from the
Objective.
world out there,
Yeah.
the res extensa, as he called it, the world that we're trying to understand. But, uh, we're trying to understand it, but we always inhabit not the real world, but a model of the world. And that's the model that our brains construct. I've sometimes called it the serotonin hallucination, which is kind of I mean, it's not the serotonin hallucination per se, but everything we experience is filtered through these neural gates, right? And everything we experience is a reflection of our neurochemical brain state at any given moment, and so we live inside this model of a world, this model reality that we construct for ourselves so that we can make sense out of it. If we didn't do that, if there were not very fine mechanisms for selectively apprehending what's available to you, what comes through our sensory gateways, it would just be a blooming, buzzing confusion. The mind and the brain is very good at constructing this model, and a lot of the reason it works so well is because it leaves out a lot of stuff. It blocks a lot of stuff that ordinarily would just come in and overwhelm you.
Yeah. So to put a bow on this coronavirus thread, then for me, the message, filtering out everything that's happening, the message is Gaia is going to preserve herself, and we're going to get increasingly urgent and impactful messages, if we call this a message, that the way that we're currently living as a human race on the planet is not sustainable, and she will make it sustainable. And
Gaia is going to preserve herself, if you will. I mean, I do not worry much about the extinction of life on the earth as such, at least not now. I think there will be events in the future. We know there will be events where, the earth is going to cook. The earth will be completely burned up as the sun goes through its usual cycles. But these are not on the horizon for a few billion years, and I think it's safe to say that by the time that rolls around, we'll be long gone from the earth. Either because we've made ourselves extinct or because we've left, or maybe a bit of both. But, sometimes I say Gaia is one tough bitch. Gaia is not threatened. Life on Earth will persist. We are not so tough. We require certain conditions to survive, and we're not by any means the hardiest organisms on Earth. And we need a certain comfort zone to survive, and we are, we're threatening that. So we know from evolution that there have been huge extinction events, in the course of evolution. There have been eras where 97% of all terrestrial life has gone extinct, due to these incredible global events. Now, on the evolutionary scale, this plays out over hundreds of millions of years. And if you look back at the fossil records and so on, at these extinction events, what you find is after the cataclysm, after the asteroid or the global volcano disruption or whatever it is, wipes out a lot of species, and then you get this incredible proliferation and diversification of species. So this is just an example of how creative life is and how it bounces back, but those species that went extinct, well, they just lost out. I mean, it wasn't that they were unsuccessful. I mean, they were successful for a while.
For a while, yeah.
But then conditions changed,
Yeah.
and they weren't so successful. Something else took their place. So maybe this is our fate, but since we are, we're the threatened species, that's very uncomfortable for us to think that.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure we talk about the Academy.
Okay.
So the McKenna Academy for Natural Science and Natural Philosophy.
Natural philosophy.
Natural philosophy. Can you, for people who aren't familiar, can you define natural philosophy and then just tell us about this project? Because I find it super intriguing and inspiring.
Yeah, well, yeah, natural philosophy is the precursor of science. Natural philosophy is what science used to be before it became totally reductive and quantitative and all that. And natural philosophy, it is a sort of more open kind of science. I mean, it respects science, it respects the methods of science, but also acknowledges that there are other ways of knowing, that are also legitimate, that can't really be quantified or measured or anything like that. That doesn't mean that they're not legitimate ways of gaining insight into the cosmos. So things like intuition and dreams and other types of non-quantitative ways of apprehending the world would be within the purview, if you will, of natural philosophy. So natural philosophy is essentially what science should be in a certain way before it became quantitative and corporate and all of those things. One problem with science as it is currently practiced is, it isn't science. That's the thing. It's applied science, or it has a rationale. It's not the pure search for truth, which is really what science should be.
It's got an agenda, you mean?
Yeah,
They're
it's
gonna,
got an
yeah,
agenda, and
yeah.
if you want
Who's
to be a
funding it?
successful scientist, these days it usually means you're in an institution, and you have to get grants, you have to publish papers, you have to have students, you have to play the science game. And and it's okay to play the science game, but the danger is you lose sight of what you're doing, and the game becomes the objective.
Yeah.
I have all these grants, I have all these graduate students, I published 500 papers, and and people, and I get a lot of respect and positive feedback. I'm not saying I do. I certainly haven't published 500 papers, nor do I want to. But a typical scientist who's respected in the academic, there are certain benchmarks of their success. It's easy to forget that what we're really involved in here, if we're doing pure science, is we're looking for truth, and it's curiosity driven. It's driven by a desire to understand, and it has these tools that enables us to tools. I might add that we were granted by psychedelics, or that we learned from psychedelics, specifically the ability to construct abstract systems, abstractions, elaborate systems of suppositions, really, about how things are. This is a learned skill, and I think
You think we got
psychedelics.
that?
I
Sorry.
do. I think psychedelics, way back, when hominids roamed the earth, much earlier, I think psychedelics gave us the ability to internalize symbols, or link meaningful images with link images and sound with meaning complexes, if you want to put it that way. So it enabled us to construct abstractions, essentially. And abstractions are suppositions about how things might be. You might call them a theory or a hypothesis, and that's what science does. It constructs hypotheses, and it tries to to disprove them. It doesn't try to prove them, because if you understand it properly, you realize you'll never have a definitive proof.
Right. There's too much
But
else.
proof, yeah. But you try to disprove it. You try to see what are the chinks in this model that I've constructed, and how can it be fixed? What are the deficiencies in this understanding? I don't say psychedelics gave us all that, but I think it gave us the ability to internalize concepts, and create this internal model of the world that we live in. This reality hallucination.
Yeah.
What the neuroscientists now, I mean, the term now, yeah, I used to call it the serotonin hallucination, or the reality hallucination. I still do, but now in neuroscience they call it the default mode network,
Right. Yeah.
and all that, and that's what it is too. And the great power of psychedelics is it temporarily disrupts this default mode network. It lets you step outside that framework temporarily, and view it from a different perspective. And then, because the default mode network is an expression of the equilibrium of consciousness, it falls back together. Psychedelics are literally, I think, like rebooting your computer.
Totally.
You take the system down, and then it gradually comes back up, and it works a little better for a while, because you've left behind kludge and bad pieces of programming and so on get caught in the system. So when you reboot the computer, it works better. And I think that's the therapeutic therapeutic property of psychedelics. They let you re-engineer this default mode network, in some ways, and that's where the integration comes in.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to return to that network. It's going to reassert itself, unless you're the very rare person that doesn't recover from a psychedelic experience and just stays out there in hyperspace. But I think that's extremely rare, you know, and most of us come back, and if we can integrate that experience, you know, in a thoughtful way, we can take those lessons and then we can apply them going forward. You know,
Yeah.
and I really think that's the core of the therapeutic action of psychedelics has to do with this ability to reorganize your worldview, if you will, and step out of these habitual modes of behaving and perceiving and thinking that we just get into, you know,
Our
after a
brain's
while.
wire, our brain is wired
Yeah,
for it, right?
exactly.
It's just
And
wired to
yeah, exactly.
reduce, and procedural
Yeah,
memory and all that.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I think that's the value of it. They're cognitive tools. They're tools that enable us to learn how to think, you know, in a more holistic manner. And in a way, they can, you know, remove the scales from our eyes temporarily. And you know how they often say, you know, or Huxley, all these people said, you know, their first psychedelic experiences, you know, it was like seeing the world for the first time,
Mm.
you know, seeing it from the perspective of a child, or seeing it as though from the hand of the maker, you know, whoever the maker is. You know, these folks were religious, right? Basically, they were. But I think that's a lot of what psychedelics do. They give you a fresh perspective, and that can be very, very valuable. You know, if you look at the some of these therapeutic protocols with people with terminal cancer and psilocybin, one reason it's so valuable for those kinds of people, if you're dying of cancer or some terminal illness, uh, naturally you're anxious. I mean, who wouldn't be? Some people are so anxious that they're just terrified at
Yeah.
the prospect of dying. And what the psilocybin seems to do for people that undergo this treatment and benefit from it is it brings them, it makes them, you know, it brings them to a realization, which is that, yes, I'm dying, but wait a minute, I'm alive
Mm.
right now. In this moment, I'm alive. And it shifts the focus from the fact that somewhere out there, a few months or years ahead, nobody knows you're going to die, to I am alive in this moment. So let's focus on that, you know, and that just relieves a lot of anxiety for many people, and fear and all that. And they can focus on what's meaningful to them in their lives, even though they're dying. And then you can reconnect with your loved ones, and you know, it can just be extremely therapeutic.
Yeah.
You know,
I
there
mean,
is no cure for death, you know, but
right.
but psilocybin may be as close as we can
As close as
come.
we're gonna get.
Yeah, yeah. It's
You
not a
know,
cure, but it's an inoculation, I
yeah.
guess, in some ways.
I mean, going back to what you just said a minute ago, seeing psychedelics as potentially the force, the resource that allowed humans to develop our capacities to think, the fact that we've outlawed them now, I mean, it's not surprising that we're acting so stupid if we've outlawed the tools that help us develop our thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
It's
that's changing.
terrifying. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's changing. That's
yeah.
changing.
Thank
And
goodness.
they were I think they were outlawed, you know, well, there's no way they should ever have been outlawed, but I think they were outlawed in some ways for good reason, you know, because the people that outlawed them recognized that they were a threat to the existing order, because they made people ask questions,
Yeah.
you know, and the powers that be don't like questions, you know, they don't like to be they want just to be accepted. Sit down, shut up, and stop asking all these questions. Well, psychedelics make you ask questions. So they knew very well what they were doing when they outlawed them in a certain sense. I mean, when they outlawed the psychedelics, the focus was on LSD, right? I mean, that
Yeah.
was the one that people had access to. That was what was going on, and LSD had really entered society at a turbulent time, and it was definitely a disruptive force. It was making people question the values of the society, and why do I need to go to Vietnam and kill
And kill
people that
other
I've
people.
never
Yeah.
met? I
Yeah.
mean, this
That
kind
sounds
of thing.
crazy. Right.
Yeah, so it was recognized as a inherently subversive technology for people but by people whose interest is in keeping everybody in line, you know.
Yeah. I want
And
to, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, now psychedelics are getting respectable again,
It's
in a
great.
certain
Yeah.
way. I mean, they're, and this is in part because of good science, that underlies them. We know what their therapeutic value is, and we've had, I mean, psychedelics were kind of, all the known psychedelics were banned around 1970. So we've had 50 years since then, and they never went away. Always people kept using them, just small numbers of people, but maybe not so small. We don't really know. Um, but the thing is, we have had almost 50 years to learn how to use these things, because when LSD first dropped into society, nobody really knew how to use it. We didn't know about the indigenous tradition. I mean, we knew about them, but we didn't, you know what I mean? There was no effort to really say, okay, we've never seen anything like this. Let's talk to the people that have used this kind of stuff for
Yeah.
10,000 years. They may have learned a thing or two,
Yeah.
and it took us a while to kind of wake up to that. But we're, as a society, I think we're mature enough to use psychedelics now, and the laws seem to be loosening up. The irony of it is, in a way, is as these things become legalized, like the corporate culture moves in
Moves in.
and
That's
wants to
right.
co-opt these things and make billions off of them. I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how you make money from psychedelics. It's they're not commodities,
They're not
They're not
commodities.
they're
Yeah.
not like cannabis. You
It's not like you
can't
can just
make
crank it out, right? The
no
same
no
experience over and over again. Yeah.
yeah, it's not like that. What it is it's uh, it's the support, it's the context that you create around psychedelics. That's the
Yeah.
thing. Call it therapies or shamanism or whatever it is. You can't really use these substances mindfully without the integration part, and a lot of people need help doing that integration and in the sessions and so on. So it's the services you provide around psychedelic therapy, not the psychedelic.
Itself.
That's where the revenue model is.
Yeah.
You
And
know.
the speaking of context, the academy,
Mm.
it sounds like, can you tell our listeners a bit about the McKenna Academy and
Yeah, well, the academy
what you're up to?
yeah, it's a nonprofit that I started with some colleagues, and it sounds egotistical to call it the McKenna Academy, but people said, well, if you're going to do this, you really should step up and own it, I mean, why be ashamed of it? So put your name on it, for God's sake. So I did. And the academy, the idea of the academy is it's a place for learning, and it's in the spirit of Eleusis. It's in the spirit of the mystery schools, which were basically psychedelic centers for learning, or they were assisted by these different plant medicines and fungal medicines. Eleusis being the longest lived and the most well-known of the Mediterranean mystery schools.
Didn't it go on for 2,000 years or something like that?
2,000 years,
2,000.
almost 2,000 years, yeah.
I learned that recently. It amazed me, yeah.
And then it was sacked and burned by the Goths in 396 AD. It had been in decline for a couple of centuries before that, but the Goths were one phenomenon of the rise of and dominance of political Christianity in the Mediterranean at that point. And these mystery religions had to be suppressed because they were everything that Catholicism and Christianity is not. These were religions that celebrated life, and sexuality and the earth, and didn't talk about an afterlife, really, didn't talk about the need for some savior or messiah to come, save our ass. It was more like, well, we don't really, we're not, I mean,
we're having a good time. We don't need
we're having a good time. We're just being happy monkeys here in this natural environment. And all of the, so much about Christianity particularly is against, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, basically. Yeah. Well, sex, drugs, and rock and roll are the essence of what we are. I mean, in a way, it's anti-biological. And this is also reflected in the fact that these religions do not respect nature. And they base everything on this hypothetical world of other world, and that if you've been good, or if you've actually atoned for your sins, then you might make it into heaven. Well, wonderful. I think it's a con game.
It's really a risky bet.
Yeah. So that is what the Academy is. We want it to be a place of learning where people can come and essentially re-engineer their consciousness, re-engineer their models of thinking, and with the use of plant medicines, but with the use of all sorts of modalities and techniques and so on.
It's in the Sacred Valley in Peru, yeah.
Well, that's aspirational.
Aspirational.
Yeah, right now it's virtual. I mean, we don't have a campus. We do events in the Sacred Valley, yes. And eventually there's a place there that we've got our eyes on that we'd like to acquire, and that would be the first physical campus of the Academy. It's a beautiful guest house called Wilkatika, and I've been going there since 2004, and it's just a lovely place, and it would be perfect to set up a school. There's a possibility that it's going to be for sale in the near future. I've known the owner since 2004. I know she's thinking about selling it, but it'll cost some money for sure.
Yeah. If someone's listening and they feel called to help, is this something that people can donate to or get in touch with you?
Oh, absolutely. You can donate. It is the we're not a we're a nonprofit in Canada. We're not yet incorporated in the States, but we will be soon. We're in process of I'll put the Academy. You can look at this website here.
www.mckenna.academy, and we'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah. And then you can read about that and what the game plan is. And the game plan is to basically have it be a place where people can come and through psychedelics and other means, they can do what natural philosophy does, which is it ponders our existential situation, our place in nature, our place in the cosmos, our how we fit in, and generally from a perspective of trying to be in harmony with nature. And we want to do this through educational means like like ayahuasca retreats, mushroom retreats, and this sort of thing, but then also doing impactful conferences on important topics, and doing research and other types of therapeutics. And kind of the long-term plan, my feeling is, if you could get the right people with influence and power, to come to a place like this and have these experiences, then maybe it will change their mindset, and then those people can go out and influence other people.
Yeah.
Because so I call it a catalytic nexus for the transformation of global consciousness, which sounds kind of hubristic, but that's basically what it is. And people say, oh yeah, well, you're starting a cult, right?
Or a religion.
It's not a cult. It's not a religion. It's an anti-cult. It's an anti-religion. Because the primary mission here, is to teach people to think for themselves. We're not here to tell you what you're supposed to think. We're here to help you learn how to think and use your mind to its optimum. So
yeah.
Anyway.
Beautiful. Are there upcoming programs that people should know about?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we did have 2 big conferences planned for the beginning of April in San Francisco with the San Francisco Psychedelic Society, and all that's been spiked now due to the coronavirus. So we're doing digital stuff, and actually on the 3rd of April. The 3rd of April is the 20th anniversary of my brother's passing. And so in honor of him, we're going to do a series of events starting on the 3rd of April. And it'll be, we'll be showing a never before broadcast, never before seen video of Terrence at Esalen in 1989 that someone unearthed out of some archive somewhere
before cell phones.
Yeah, maybe. So we're going to show that, and then Eric Davis, who you may be familiar with, this guy who wrote High Weirdness and has written a lot about Terrence and me. Then he's going to interview me, and that'll be on Friday the 3rd, and then the next day. And over the next 3 weekends, we're just going to have little, like 2.5 hour sessions where I am talking to different people who knew Terrence well, old friends, basically, reminiscing, but also just a freewheeling discussion like this. So on the 4th of April, we'll have one of these with Bruce Damer and Luis Eduardo Luna. Both of these are close friends of mine. I don't know if those names mean anything to you.
Not familiar yet, but I hope to be soon.
Well, Luis Eduardo Luna is one of Terrence's, my oldest friends, and he's actually the world's expert on the ethnography and anthropology of ayahuasca. But we've known him since 1971, so that's a long way back. And Bruce Damer, I have not known him so long, but he also, very interesting guy. He's an astrobiologist, has very interesting ideas about the origins of life, and we'll probably get into that. And then the next weekend, the 11th, I'll do interviews with Paul Stamets and Wade Davis. You probably know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then the weekend after that, I will do a 3-way conversation with Rupert Sheldrake and Ralph Abraham. And so that's what we're going to do. And Rupert and Ralph and Terrence used to do these things at Esalen, which became known as trialogues. And they actually published 2 or 3 books out of this. Trialogues at the Edge of the West. So I'm going to try and recreate that in the sense that I'll bring Rupert and Ralph Abraham together with little old me, and I don't even pretend to come close to Terrence in terms of his erudition and so on. But we're just going to have a freewheeling conversation. So this will all be up on the website and also on the San Francisco Psychedelic Society website. We're getting our Facebook page up for the Academy, so it'll be there. I mean, we should have done that a long time ago, but didn't. So those things are coming up in the immediate future.
Great. Well, yeah, we'll put links to all those in the show notes, and we're going to hustle to get this out by April 3rd.
Okay.
Apologies to if you're listening and it's past April 3rd and you're like, dang it, missed it. But
well, that's okay, because even if you miss the event on the 3rd, it'll keep going through up. I think the 18th is the last one. So
great.
So yeah.
Do you have time for a few more questions, Dennis? How you
Sure.
feeling? Yeah, there's just a few more kind of burning things that I wanted to ask you.
Give me a second here.
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back. Got the heater on down here. It's getting a little stuffy.
Nice. Okay. Are you in Canada? Are you in Canada now, or where are you?
Yes. Yeah, I'm home in Abbotsford.
Nice.
It's about an hour outside Vancouver. This is where we landed just about a year ago. We arrived on the 31st of March, officially presented our papers and became landed immigrant. Well, I became a landed immigrant.
Nice. Congratulations.
My wife is Canadian, so she didn't have to, but because she's Canadian, that's how come I get to come in. So we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary of relocating to Canada permanently now. Where are you based?
Well, actually, I went the other way. So I was born in Toronto, and then my wife's American. So I emigrated. So now I have dual citizenship after a lot of paperwork and a few years.
Yeah, well, it's not too late to come back, and at least you have that option.
At least now. I got that passport, I can still.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. It's a nice get out of jail free card. Maybe.
Definitely.
I wanted to ask you about DMT, and the question that I wrote down here is: if DMT were legal, would you recommend that people do it? And if so, in what context? And if not, why not?
If DMT were legal, would I recommend people do it? Well, I'd recommend people do it whether it's legal or not, frankly. I mean, it's never stopped me, but I would recommend people do it. But again, you get the most out of these things if you approach it thoughtfully. If you pay attention to set and setting, that's primarily what how you can sort of frame the experience. And DMT and 5-methoxy DMT, they're both incredible psychedelics.
Are the effects of those two very different?
They are. Yeah, I don't know. That's subjective. They're very similar, actually, in that they're short acting. They're very intense psychedelics. And 5-methoxy DMT is not visual for most people. And DMT
is that the toad? Is 5-methoxy
that's the toad?
The toad,
yeah. But there are many plants that contain it as well. Both the DMT and 5-methoxy DMT are quite widespread in plants. They're not rare compounds. I mean, most people don't know this, but they're quite abundant in nature. There are probably tens of thousands of species that contain these simple tryptamines because they're so close to tryptophan, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Tryptophan is the precursor of these things. And it's one of the 20 that goes up to make protein. So tryptophan is in everything. And just two simple biochemical steps away from tryptophan gives you DMT. So
Oh,
it's very
interesting.
common. Um, Not all plants may make usable amounts of it, but I actually think that probably all plants make some of it, a little bit of it, because it's so close to to tryptophan, which is a universal metabolite. But the thing about DMT and 5-methoxy, they both are very, very short unless you use an MAO inhibitor to take them orally. Neither one are orally active. This is the whole basis of ayahuasca pharmacology, that it's DMT. You know about how ayahuasca is made, right?
Yep.
It's made from two plants, at least two plants, but one of the plants contains DMT. Well, DMT is not orally active unless you take an MAO inhibitor, a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, that prevents it from being broken down in the gut by monoamine oxidase, this enzyme. You inhibit that. And then instead of being 20 minutes, as it is when you smoke it or vape it, it's stretched out to 5, 6, 7 hours. So it's a very different kind of experience when you take it orally.
Yeah.
And that's the essence of ayahuasca pharmacology. It's DMT activated orally with these MAO inhibitors.
So the setting, so it sounds like your answer is yes for the DMT question. And then what kind of setting do you think is?
The setting, again, it depends on how you're taking it. If you're taking it orally, as in ayahuasca, you probably want a fairly structured ritual setting.
Robust,
I
yeah.
mean, with a shaman, or doesn't have to be a shaman, but some kind of vessel, in a
Yeah.
way, a vessel to hold the experience. Sound immersion environments are very good for this. If the practitioner knows what they're doing, that can be very good. It doesn't even have to involve that. Just being, it's probably best to at least the first few times you do it, to have a sitter, to have somebody there who is just there for reassurance. They may not even be in the same room, but just to have someone that, if you need to, have a touch of reality, or hold your hand out and have someone hold your hand, because it can get very strange out there.
That feels crucial for me for some reason. I think it feels crucial to have somebody around that can tether me back to some sense of
I think
what's
that's
going on.
perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
I mean, most people feel that way. And then if you get used to the experience, then after a while you'll feel all right doing it by yourself, but you always may prefer to have other people. But DMT and 5-methoxy are, very, very rapid, and when you take them by smoking them. And one of the potential downsides of that is it comes and goes so fast, there's no real therapeutic effect. You're not there long enough to really internalize anything therapeutic. You kind of just come away with a sense of astonishment, and it was like, that was the most profound experience I've ever had. But I have an appointment at 3:00, so I better get on my way. And you just get right back to baseline. You get right back into that, but then you do have that memory. And I think they can be used therapeutically, but it's better to try and find a way to prolong the experience.
Because ayahuasca moves more at the speed of emotion.
There's you can bring more out of it because you can spend more time in that place, and it's not. The other is like a quick roller coaster ride, and the ayahuasca, the ayahuasca slows it down a bit. I mean, so if DMT is smoked, is like playing a tape on fast forward, This is like playing it at normal speed. You
Mm.
get a lot more out of it,
Do you think
And
ayahuasca is the most therapeutic
no,
in the right
no, not.
container?
Well, ayahuasca, yeah. I mean, for the case of DMT, you can use vaping and repeated vaping to spend longer times in the DMT state, and that works pretty good. Now, on the experimental level, people are talking about doing indwelling catheters, like drip
Yeah, I'm
catheters,
gonna
where
try and have Daniel McQueen on here and
okay,
ask him
well,
about that.
you know all about it then.
Well, it's in
Yeah,
Boulder, so it's just a few miles away from us here
you're in Denver.
in Boulder.
Oh, you're in Boulder.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, yeah. So he's approaching it, and originally I was skeptical. I'm still skeptical, but I think this is something that needs to be looked into. Probably not by me personally. I'm not really, you
Me
know.
neither. I don't think I'm the test subject for that one.
But I'm glad other people are doing it, and I
Yeah.
think this may be the way we learn how to use DMT therapeutically.
Mm.
If we can, I mean, in some ways, I mean, psilocybin or psilocin, the active form of DMT, is the perfect orally active form of DMT.
Psilocin is?
Psilocin, yeah. Psilocybin is converted to psilocin in the
Yeah.
body. Psilocin is the active drug. It's very, very close to DMT chemically.
Huh.
It's just so psilocin is 4-hydroxy dimethyltryptamine.
Right.
And that hydroxy group is just enough of a chemical modification to make it orally active. And the thinking is that because it's got this hydroxy group on top of the indole ring, the side chain curves around. All these things are charged at physiological pH. So the side chain with the nitrogen curves around so it's adjacent to the oxygen. So the monoamine oxidase can't get at it. It's got its
Ah,
own built-in protection. I don't know
protection.
if you want to get off into the weeds on chemistry here, but that's the basic idea.
That's interesting. Um,
Yeah.
and I really wanted to ask you this question. And we've got this model now in the West that's making a lot of progress of psychedelics as a way to heal trauma and a way to heal PTSD. We've got this concept of trauma and how it's stored in the body, and how MDMA with
Right.
MAPS's work allows us to access that trauma and release it and experience it. And then we have this shamanistic tradition of using psychedelics for thousands of years in that
Uh-huh.
context. It sounds like with the academy you're bringing those two together, but how do you bring those two together, and what are the downfalls of the current clinical approach?
Well, I think you don't necessarily have to bring them together, but I think I think you bring them together by exchanging information. I mean, I feel like with psychedelics, there's no right way to do it. There's no ideal set or setting. Most important thing is that you approach it, with a certain amount of respect and seriousness. But then beyond that, there is no correct way to do it. I would not say, oh, it has to be a shamanic approach. It has to be, a clinical approach. They both have their virtues. They both have a lot to be said for them. Ideally, if you can bring those two things together, where you can combine ritual and psychotherapeutic approaches, you can come up with really powerful therapeutic modalities. And I think that's what's happening now that psychedelics are going legal. People are looking at how do we approach, you know, how do we create contexts in which these things can be used, and it's not just about the it's not just about pathologies. These are psychedelics can benefit well people too. They're learning tools. You don't have to be sick or have a mental disorder to benefit from psychedelics. But if you have something like intractable depression, addiction, and that sort of thing, they can be very helpful. But they shouldn't be limited to that. We need to recognize, I think, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out on the regulatory angle. But we need to recognize that altered states inherently are therapeutic for people.
For everybody, right?
Everybody needs to step out of their reference frame once in a while.
Yeah.
And that, so the therapeutic promise of psychedelics is to create places where this is allowed, and not, this is recognized that this is okay. It's not strictly a medical use, but it can be a therapeutic use, just the same way that anything like yoga or anything that you might do for yourself is not necessarily a medical treatment, but it is good for you.
Yeah.
Psychedelics are like that,
The betterment of well people.
The betterment of the well.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Dennis, this has been fantastic for me.
Great.
And is there anything that you want to, mention, or new things you're working on, new initiatives, or just ideas that you want to plant in the minds of our listeners before we wrap up?
Well, I don't know. I guess I always leave these things, I always repeat kind of what I learned from ayahuasca, what I learned from psychedelics, but it comes particularly clear when I take ayahuasca, which has been kind of my main plant teacher for a long time. I mean, I respect the others, and also I'm, getting reacquainted with mushrooms, which I sort of have neglected for a while. I think that in general, psychedelics remind us of the limitations of what we think we know. I mean, this is what I get through ayahuasca very much. The message that remember how little you know. I mean, you turn that over and say, or another way to put it is, if you think you know what's going on, go back to class, because what you need to understand is we don't have a fucking clue about what's going on. And so that's the other side of it. There's no reason for arrogance. If we can recognize that we're fundamentally ignorant and don't really know very much about the way things are, then that's not depressing to me. That's exciting, because that means you're a blank canvas for learning. You're ready to learn because you've got rid of all of these assumptions, which are probably not really helpful. So then you can go ahead and focus on what you need to know. Knowing that, you're never going to know everything. You're not, I guess I'm old enough, or maybe I've given up, I don't know. I'm old enough to realize that when I die, I'm still going to have a lot of questions. I don't think you reach a point where you say, oh, I've got this. I pretty well have this figured out. If you have it figured out, if you think you have it figured out, you're delusional.
Beautiful. Well said.
You need to go back to the drawing board.
Go back to class.
Yeah, take more medicine and think this over.
Beautiful. Great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dennis. Thanks for being on the show. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And let me know when it's up there.
Yeah, and people listening can go to mckenna.academy, and Dennis you're also on Twitter. I think you're just Dennis McKenna.
Dennis McKenna 4. Yep.
Dennis McKenna 4 on Twitter.
Yeah.
And the Facebook page is coming up, so we'll put links to all.
I have a couple of Facebook pages, but this one for the Academy is under construction, so it'll be up. I have very kind people who are taking that off my hands, and it'll be up within a week. There'll be something there, and then that's Great. Another place people can connect to all this. So Great. Yeah. So thank you for the invitation, Will. I really appreciate it.